CBS News has learned President Trump's former personal attorney, Michael Cohen, secretly recorded conversations between the two of them. And according to the New York Times, Cohen and Mr. Trump were discussing a payment to former Playboy model Karen McDougal. She claims to have had an affair with Trump starting in 2006. The president's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, says the president did discuss the payment with Cohen, but that the payment was never made. Joining me now from Boston is Michael Graham. He's a CBSN political contributor, Boston Herald columnist, and politics editor for NHJournal.com. Good to see you. So this is talk of hush money for a Playboy model. Is this a concern if you're President Trump with your support? Is this something that Trump supporters care about?
Donald Trump, Playboy models, payoffs, tapes, we call that a Friday in the Trump administration so far. I mean, it's been such a wild ride for Trump supporters so far. And I've been fascinated by the number of his fans I've talked to today who really just dismiss this as this is nothing, been there, done that. The argument that I've heard so many times is once you survive the Access Hollywood tape where he infamously talked about grabbing women by parts that you should not grab women by, what's this? The Stormy Daniels story, everybody knew that it was true from the beginning, even the people who pretended that they didn't. But I don't know that it's the same because I've worked in audio, radio for more than 15 years. Audio is a powerful medium. It's very intimate. And we don't know what's going to happen when the tape is released. We know the tape's going to come out one way or the other, either Trump's people or the media, somebody will release it. And I think it really depends on what we hear. If what you hear is kind of Trump being Trump and dismissive, if it doesn't pass some unstated boundary in the minds of his supporters, then I think this will just go into the huge box of things that evangelical Christians are just determined to ignore until at least 2021. But
what would the boundary even be, though? Would evangelical Christians be more worried about him making a hush payment than having the affair? Like, what will the tape prove?
Well, right now, exactly. I mean, what will the tape prove about Trump? I don't think it will prove anything. That's my point. I think it's all in the hearing. If it sounds whatever that undefinable quality is of disgusting, repulsive, if when you hear it, the example I use is the border issue. The Trump administration made the policy to start arresting families. It wasn't until images of the kids behind the fence and the audio of a crying child were heard that people were affected. This audio is going to affect people. It may affect them in one way. Giuliani says, you hear it and you go, this is just a guy taking care of business. Other people say no. By the way, don't you love Giuliani versus Lanny Davis? The 1990s called. They want their politics back. I mean, are we ever going to get past these people? But we'll have to see. Yeah, but we have to see what the audio says. I also want to go back to, you just said something about what it would take for evangelicals. I don't think it can be overstated the impact that the Supreme Court picks are having on that part of his support. Brett Kavanaugh looks like another home run, certainly from a standpoint of credentials, et cetera. And every time I approach my evangelical friends and start to say something critical, it's almost like automatic, Supreme Court. They just, that's all they need for now. But this week, I saw for the first time some shakiness in that support. His performance with Putin was so off-putting. He looked so weak. He looked so out of his depth. The presidency looked bigger than the person in it. And you saw his close allies rushed in and said, you have to do something. And what does that tell us? That tells us that although Trump says he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and his supporters would still be with him, I think we now know at least it matters who he shoots. That there is some wiggle in there where they will start saying, I'm not sure I'm going to stay with you. And we'll have to see once the audio is released how many more tapes there are, what topics they cover, whether or not that'll be enough to shake his supporters enough to get them to walk away.
But you mentioned Putin. Why, given everything that the president has done that outrages so many of his critics, why did cozying to Putin cause so much trouble with people who normally support him? And I'm also curious, we heard so much from folks in Washington, Republicans in Washington, who were aghast at this. Were your callers also upset with the president?
Not particularly. I mean, they weren't happy, but it wasn't enough, once again, to make them jump off the boat. For the first time, they shifted from the middle of the boat over to the rail. They started looking around, but they didn't jump. And it goes back to, why did it matter? When Trump was in the room alone, and people talk about what did he say. Trump supporters, they don't care. They trust him, whatever. What's he going to do, you know? But when he was on TV and he looked like the submissive player, when he looked like Russia was driving the agenda, when he was siding with Russia versus America, and I know that Trump tried to put in the intelligence community, and they're obviously having that fight. And then there are plenty of Trump supporters who'll tell you they are unhappy with how the FBI handled the Clinton investigation first and then the Trump investigation. But still, that's the American intelligence community. When Trump looked like he was deferring to Russia over America, that hit a gag reflex. And so I wish I could tell you that there's an algorithm and that if Trump does X, his supporters will respond this way. It's not. It's kind of like the way Trump moves. He senses his audience by feel. He kind of senses what people want to hear, he senses his opponent's weaknesses. They're just these spots, and he stumbled into one. He may, with this tape, stumble into another one. We'll have to wait and see.
The president, as you mentioned, so much about showing strength, and I suppose in a way he showed a type of strength where in the face of all this criticism about being cozy with Putin, he invites him to Washington this fall. What did you make of that?
I make of it that he wants a rematch. I make of it that he's like the guy who, you're at the party and the other guy had a really good, quip and nailed you, and then you got back to your place and you thought, I got a great idea. So he wants to have a rematch and go back after Putin. If Putin's smart, he won't come. But there's another part here that just astonishes me. If you look at the actual policies implemented by the Trump administration, fighting that gas line from Russia to Germany is not doing Putin any favors. Putting pressure on Germany to say, hey, we're not going to protect you while you take money from the people we're protecting you from, not good. President Obama would not allow our missile defenses to go into Eastern Europe. Trump agreed to that and to weapons to the Ukraine. He has a real message about our policy, and he never mentions it, won't talk about it. I am completely perplexed.
Okay, it's not just Republicans who can be divided. House Democrats this week, 70 of them, which is less than half of the caucus, formed a Medical for All caucus, basically saying we're going to do single-payer health care. This is an issue that divides Democrats. How do you see this shaking out?
Well, Medicare for All is really interesting because as soon as you say Medicare, lots of voters over 60 start paying attention. If they were just saying single payer, I don't think they wouldn't be putting themselves in the same box. There's a reason why Nancy Pelosi and the other leadership did not show up for that caucus event. Their names are not listed there. They know that if you go out and say we're going to give Medicare to everyone, that Medicare recipients are going to say, hey, wait a minute, I heard this thing's going broke already. What are you talking? Are you going to endanger my Medicare by giving it to everyone? Then there's the cost. The conservative low-end cost is that this is $14 trillion in new spending over the next 10 years. It's more than likely double that in real numbers. And so you're turning a strength, which is Democrats want to expand health care versus those mean old Republicans who want to turn to the market, into a weakness by doing this. Having said that, there are a bunch of people running in districts like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's district, where the primary voters in the Democratic primaries don't want to hear any of that. They want to hear Medicare for all. Bernie Sanders said it. We're on board. So, for example, here in Massachusetts, Mike Capuano, an incumbent, 20 years, usually a pretty reasonable liberal, he's on this Medicare for All group, even though he knows for a fact that it's mathematically insane, because he's desperately trying to fend off a candidate, a young African-American woman who's a very, Bernie-esque, candidate who has a lot of passion behind her. These Democrats see what's coming. They've got to find a way to balance that passionate base that wants some things that aren't particularly realistic, like impeachment now and abolish ICE, with how do I win the election in November by not going too far. It's very similar to what Tea Party candidates faced back in 2010.
Well, that was going to be my last question. Do you think this could be a Tea Party-like schism that causes the same kind of trouble for Democrats that this splinter group, which is now, half the party, has caused for Republicans?
Right. Well, Republicans are hoping that that's what it is, that it's a schism. I would remind everybody that what those crazy Tea Partiers, and I was one of the Tea Party organizers, what they did in 2010. 64 Republican members of Congress. They took Congress back in one of the biggest waves in the modern era. It is possible that if Trump's numbers stay soft or go down, if there are problems out of this tape or some other incident, that these candidates who in a typical year would probably be out of their constituents' comfort zones in kind of purple districts might just win because the anti-Trump sentiment is so strong, or because some Republicans stay home because they're unhappy with the ticket, et cetera. So all I can say to Republicans is you can laugh that these people are going too far left, but one day you may be calling those too far left people Mr. and Miss Congressman.
Okay, I'll call you Mr. Graham. Michael, good to see you. Have a good weekend.
My friends call me Michael, please.
Okay,
Thank
fair
you.
enough.